Talk Show. Recorded live.
Hello and welcome to the Castle Dracula Horror Movie Podcast. On this podcast we talk about horror movies, vampire movies, and all-around awesomeness, and this week we continue our comedy horror retrospective with Young Frankenstein. Bear in mind, if you haven't seen today's movie, we're going to be talking about it from the perspective of horror fans who have, so warning, spoilers ahead. From Denver, Colorado, I'm your host, Jason Henderson, author of the Alex Van Helsing series and the upcoming game, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Out of the Shadows from Activision. With me from Austin is Drew Edwards, writer of the long-running webcomic Halloween Man, a contributing writer to Rockabilly Online, and a contributing writer to an upcoming issue of Tales from the Grave from Monsterverse Comics. Say hello, Drew.
That's Frankenstein.
Frankenstein. In Los Angeles, special guest Adam Foshko, screenwriter and creative producer for the highly successful Skylanders series, as well as Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3, the viralicious horror action game Prototype 2, and the upcoming game Call of Duty Online. I can't believe there's that much stuff. Say hello, Adam.
Hi.
Hi. That's a heck of a lot of stuff. And also in Denver, with color commentary, host of the mom-oriented podcast, Pod Moms, attorney Julia Guzman. Say hello.
I wish, to God, I had like a recording of horses whinnying that I could have played when you said my name. That would have been great, but I didn't think of it ahead of time.
Somebody will have to explain that gag to me. It's very funny, but I'm still.
You don't know why.
All right. Young Frankenstein.
Oh, I know why.
Well, I know why everybody says why, but I'm not even sure if it's true. I'm beginning to doubt my senses of reality. So. Young Frankenstein is this is the most unbelievable thing about this, a 1974 American comedy film directed by Mel Brooks, starring Gene Wilder as the title character, a descendant of the infamous Dr. Victor Frankenstein. The film is an affectionate parody of the classical horror film genre, in particular the Frankenstein movies from Universal, produced in the 30s and 40s. Most of the lab equipment used as props were created by Kenneth Strickfaden for the 1931 Frankenstein. And to further reflect the atmosphere, this movie was shot entirely in black and white, which was rare in the 70s, and employed a 30s-style opening credits and scene transitions, in iris outs, wipes, fades to black. It has that feel. This is wonderful. The film also features a notable period score by Brooks' longtime composer, John Morris. So, first impressions, let's reverse it from last week. Let's go Adam, Drew, Julia, Jason. We'll all try to keep these first impressions to like 2 minutes so we can get into a lot of stuff to talk about. But first impressions, lay it on us, Young Frankenstein.
Great. So, I mean, when I saw this picture, it came at a time that was, I get to think of it the perspective of when I was a kid when I saw it and now having watched it again. When I was a kid, it was right through the sweet spot of loving Universal monsters. And so, it was one of those films that Blazing Saddles, hadn't, I had just sort of gotten an idea of what Blazing Saddles was. But so you tell me about Karloff or Cheney or any of the Universal monsters, I knew way too much about them. I love the Greg Toland cinematography, even though I didn't know what that was at the time. I liked a lot of the look and the feel of it. But this was the first time that there was actually crossover for me. I realized that I could take sort of my love of the Marx Brothers, we'll say at the time, and Universal Monsters, and there was actually a place where these two things could intersect, and not just intersect, but sort of live kind of really happily. It really opened my eyes to modern comedy, as well as the fact that, and parody, even in that sort of Mel Brooks kind of way. So this was a perfect marriage of comedy and monsters at really the best time for me when I was growing up. And even seeing it again, this film still really holds up. People say that it's sort of a classic and it's timeless, and it honestly is. It really is a remarkable work. Some think it's Mel Brooks' best work, and it very likely is, I think.
Wow. Okay. Adam, I have a feeling we're all going to like this movie.
I wish I could tell you I hate it, but it's just not possible.
No, it's not possible. It'd be very difficult. Yeah, Adam, lay it on us. First impressions, Young.
Adam did just lay it on you.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm looking at my old script. I apologize. Drew, we'll fix that in post. That's my favorite joke about this. There is no post. Okay, Drew.
Well, I always hold this movie up is an example of how to do a parody right. And I feel like good parody comes from a place of not only affection, but also studied, almost discipline, because this movie is so pitch perfect in how it copies the style of the Universal horror films. And my experience with this movie is very much like Adam's. I loved the Universal Monsters as a kid, and I still love the Universal Monsters. You know, my entire apartment is littered with Universal Monsters bric-a-brac.
Sure.
And this fits very well, even though it is not a film that was put out by Universal. This fits very well into that canon while still being this wonderful comedy with, frankly, one of the best casts ever assembled for a comedy film.
When we get into presentation and influences, I want you to explain to us what the heck is the deal with Universal. So, all right. Okay. Julia, what are your first impressions for Young Frankenstein?
I really thought that movie was hilarious the first time I saw it, and I thought it was hilarious again this time and however many times I've seen it in between. A couple times. I haven't seen it a whole bunch of times. But, I mean, it just has such a great mix of wonderful, wonderful comedic minds. And I don't know. I think I really liked that whole, you know, I was like a big fan of History of the World Part 2 and all those kind of movies that have, you know, Madeline, Kahn and Mel Brooks and all those guys. So this is just, I mean, I just love this movie. That's all.
Okay. Geez, I actually am going to keep mine to about less than a minute because you guys both said I enjoyed this as a kid, and as I came to enjoy horror movies a lot, I just always really appreciated this one seemed to like respect those works in a way that other parodies, other comedies in this, you know, in horror, you know, seem to miss everything. You know, you watch a lot of parodies and they don't seem to have the affection and the awareness of the genre that this did. So that's pretty good. And you'll find that often when you'll have a movie that's supposed to be a parody of one thing, but it's mixing in stuff from other genres and the jokes don't quite fit. This is just so, at least it appears, so disciplined. So, all right, let's get into the presentation and the influences of Young Frankenstein. And as Drew, you mentioned, of course, that you're a huge Universal fan, so maybe you could talk best about, like, what in the heck is this movie trying to show us? If somebody out there is listening and they're 20 years old and they think, oh, God, the movie from 1974, it's called Young Frankenstein, I popped it in, I don't understand what I'm looking at. What's the deal with Universal? And I say that, by the way, from the fact that I never was a huge Universal fan. I was always a Hammer fan. So it took me until I was a grown-up to really start to fall in love with the Universal horror thing. What is Universal horror?
The key points of the Universal horror universe, and they're all on full display here. First of all, there's a sort of nebulous time and place to it. Like, for example, they call the setting of this Transylvania, which, of course, is, you know, a classic horror setting going all the way back to the original Dracula.
And yeah, the people have like all kinds of different Cockney and German accents. All
different kinds of accents. The people speak in a sort of pseudo-German. And you are, and this is where the parody comes in, you can apparently take a train from New York to get to Transylvania.
Yeah. No, and it's the whole, you know, pardon me, what is it? Pardon me, boy.
Pardon me, boy, is this the Transylvania station?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's 29. Oh, can I give you a shine?
There's also this very heavy atmosphere in those movies. There's lots of fog. There's all these holdovers from the German impressionistic period where people cast not just the shadow, but a ridiculously long shadow. And there's a great example of this in this movie where Peter Boyle's monster is walking down the streets, and this could be in a straight horror film, where he's walking down the street and his shadow just looks 15 feet tall.
That's right.
And that's, to me, if you're going to sort of encapsulate both the look and a feel of Universal horror. Like, this movie does that very, very well. It's a beautiful movie.
The shadows are fantastic. Let's see. I think it was David Scal. Have you read the book by David Scal on Universal Horror? I think it's called Horror Show.
Yeah. I actually have that on my bookshelf.
Oh, such a delightful book. I mean, seriously, it is. David Scal writes really wonderful just histories of horror, and I mean histories like with a capital H. These are just, these are history books on entertainment in the same way that guy who writes like The Late Show and stuff like that. Just very well documented. Anyway, he talked about the Universal being, I think he put it this way, he called it the nightmare of an American GI. That it was like an American GI's way of seeing Europe.
I wish I could have phrased it that well.
I guess that's why Scal brings in the big bucks. That's
super astute. And by the way, that applies to films like The Mummy. When you talk about like Egypt and everything else, everyone's got a fez, and they're all kind of running. It's like it sort of applies to Karloff's Mummy as well. So that's a very astute observation.
Well, and they do get into that here because like the inspector and all his men kind of are dressed like Nazis.
Yeah. Kenny Mars. I actually worked with Kenny Mars one time before.
Really?
Before he passed
For
away.
what?
Yeah. In Freelancer, I worked with Kenny Mars, and he was Freelancer and also Medal of Honor. He was terrific. He did. He actually it was actually doing German stuff, for Medal of Honor, and of course I was like, can we get him to do Kemp? Because that to me was the boyhood fantasy come to life.
For the listener, Kenny Mars plays Inspector Kemp, who is a one-armed inspector who has a mechanical arm that he can do all kinds of crazy stuff.
Well, he's a direct lift from a character in Son of Frankenstein, which a lot of this movie is lifted from. Yes,
and Kenny Mars does this just crazy multi-nationalist accent that even the other people in this so-called Transylvania can't quite understand.
Yeah, they're always going, what?
Words like footsteps come out, footsteps, and this is also the guy who, yes, and he did the voice of King Triton in Little Mermaid, and I mean, this guy was so busy, right up until his death, actually, so...
we're going to get a call tomorrow. I'm not dead.
Okay, somebody please look up and make sure that I'm not wrong.
He's not with us.
Okay. Well...
He went to the lumberyard.
I mean, no, it's terrible that he's dead, but I am glad that I didn't say that wrong.
We'll fix that in post as well.
Now Kenny Mars' family is going to go, what is the matter with you?
Yeah.
Seriously, it'll be yet another. I get so many emails. What is the matter with you? Okay. What in heck were we talking about? All right. So this movie started out, speaking of the influences, Son of Frankenstein, that's actually where this movie began, because it turns out for a Mel Brooks movie, and Adam, you said it yourself, Mel Brooks was the king of these, really expressive, big, loud, farcical parodies. Blazing Saddles was a big, big deal before this. Mm-hmm. And, and I've seen his other parodies. I think this is one of the best. And what's weird to me about this one is that this one has a complicated history that starts with Gene Wilder wanting to do this ode to the Frankenstein films. And Gene Wilder, who was an actor who had been in The Producers, was actually wrote up a treatment based on, as he says it, he goes, some Frankenstein, some Bride of Frankenstein, some Son of Frankenstein, and then he goes, and even a little Revenge of Frankenstein, which is a Universal-ish Hammer movie. It's like one of the Hammer movies that was made to look kind of like a Universal picture. And he wrote up this treatment, and I wonder, and this is what I want you guys to sort of analyze, I feel like the fact that it came from someone other than Brooks originally is what gives it the sort of discipline that it has. Is that wrong? Is that reaching?
Not the way Gene Wilder actually tells it. I mean, he seems to be he's very flattering of Mel Brooks, and he says that he learned more about being a director and a screenwriter from working with him than anyone else.
Okay.
Yeah. No,
Well,
I mean, it just started.
Go ahead.
It just started out with his, Gene Wilder has this idea, and then he wants Mel Brooks, and Mel Brooks, I mean, apparently just completely takes it over and runs with it. And there's only a few things that Gene Wilder sort of insists on and says, "Yeah, I really want to do this," and Mel Brooks kind of goes, "Okay, fine," but most of it, it's like, yeah, it's him.
Interesting.
I think Wilder is, I think he has said that Marty Feldman was the heart and soul of the picture, and I think that's true in terms of the comedy. But I think the heart and soul of the picture really is Wilder, because I think that in the comedy, in the parody of it, which Brooks is brilliant coming out of Sid Caesar, coming out of all the things that he'd done before. He's just brilliant. It's physical comedy and at timing and then at directing it, being able to set it up and pay it off. But I think when you get to what kind of makes this picture work, is this faithful reproduction of the themes and the style, not just the style, but the themes of the Universal pictures, particularly Frankenstein. And I think I would even go back to the original story of Frankenstein. I think, Drew, you've said it well, and you should probably say it here too, about kind of what made the Frankenstein story and character resonate, and kind of what, and this is repeated here.
Yeah, do you want to talk about that?
It follows the general idea of there's this creature that is made against its will. He has nothing but love in his heart. He wants to be loved. But because he is malformed, he will never be accepted within a normal society. And that is well on display here. And actually, I will go so far as to say that while this is a comedy, an excellent comedy, this is also one of the better Frankenstein films because it does display that incredibly well. And Peter Boyle is actually really good as the monster. And in his own way, I would say as good as Karloff and as good as anybody who's come along since Karloff.
And same thing for Gene Wilder. I mean, the fact is that scene when Gene Wilder decides that the way to handle this is to make sure the monster feels loved, and he's like, "This is a good boy." He's like, "You're a good." And, I mean, that's a really moving scene. It's not played for laughs at all. It's really sweet.
Well, Gene Wilder is actually a really great mad scientist too. When the time comes for him to be bombastic and insane, he really brings it. I mean,
for sure.
That speech he gives when he's on the.
Well, he's Willy Wonka is what it is. I mean, whenever he does he goes into mad scientist mode, suddenly he's Willy Wonka, and then you're just like.
But Willy Wonka could be argued as a good mad scientist.
He is absolutely a good mad scientist.
But let's not lose sight of the fact that we're talking about these very emotional beats, these emotional elements, these themes that are active and shine through all the comedy. That I think we can attribute a large amount of this, I think, to Wilder, particularly in the original script. And Brooks is very funny and also has good moments. But let's not also forget that in one of the funniest, most sort of out of left field kind of moments in the entire picture, which is the Irving Berlin putting on the Ritz bit, that was Wilder's.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like he was trying to make, pure pathos and Mel Brooks came in and funnied it up. No, I mean, they actively had...
Well, and also Peter Boyle, because apparently Peter, they didn't know what to have the monster do, and then Peter Boyle is the one who comes up with, and then everybody thought it was so funny.
I always felt like that scene was kind of curbed from a little bit. I mean, obviously there's a lot that's different about it, but it always reminded me of the scene at the end of King Kong, where Kong has been put on display.
Oh, that's interesting, yeah.
I think that's right. I think that's a really good point.
He gets away and he,
Yeah. I mean, it is so out of left field. And, when you hear, and people should really watch the 30-minute documentary about the making of Young Frankenstein. But that whole scene, you're right, Adam, because it blows my mind that is the weirdest darn scene in the whole movie, where all of a sudden Frankenstein decides the way to be a complete success is to introduce the monster to the medical profession and have a big to-do and black tie and tail. Okay, fine, with you so far. And he goes, so then I'm going to have the monster wear black tie and tails, and we're going to do putting on the Ritz. That's a crazy, funny, weird idea. And yet, you're right, that was Gene Wilder's concept from his treatment that he actually fought Mel Brooks to keep in because Mel Brooks thought it was going too far, which is saying something. I mean, that is amazing. And it is. It's one of those things that people remember from the picture. Mm-hmm. And it's also really heartbreaking. It's a tough, when you forget sometimes that you're watching a comedy, you feel terrible for this monster that, it's like he doesn't understand what's going on. He doesn't know why people are throwing, and yet it's also absurdly funny because these medical doctors have brought cabbages that they're going to throw at the monster. So that is really strange. So you're right. I mean, I guess what we're talking about then is a really rare and unusual, and I guess never repeated, partnership between Mel Brooks and Gene Wilder. That just gives you this incredible thing.
Nothing like the Frankenstein monster itself. Nothing is the sum of its. Everything is the sum of its parts. I think what makes this movie great is that there are so many individual parts of it that are great.
Yes. Oh, so many great gags. And in fact, before we just go off on our favorite gags, I want to talk a little bit about the cast. So we've talked a little bit about Wilder, who for those who I pity you if you've been following the conversation this far and don't know this movie. But Gene Wilder plays the modern day descendant of Frankenstein who realizes he's inherited Frankenstein's castle and goes back at first for reasons that are pretty empty, I suppose, and then realizes that he's going to live out Frankenstein's destiny and recreate life. Now, question. First of all, when the heck does this movie take place?
Well, that's again, though, that is part of the style of Universal, because Universal was always in a nebulous time period.
Yeah.
That's true, because they got, they take a train, there's
horses and carriages, and there's people running around in lederhosen, and Teri Garr is dressed like the Swiss Miss. I mean, it's...
Yes. Yeah, so in theory, this could be... it's just meaningless to say. It could be the early 20th century. It could be the 1940s.
Well, but again, that's the whole point. What time period? That's a very key thing to this style.
And
I think
listeners to the show can remember that we talked about Dracula's Daughter, which was a straight Universal picture and had exactly the same weirdness to it. It's maybe the 1930s. It's maybe the 1890s. It's really hard to say. And
I think that's one of the reasons why those movies have endured and this movie has endured is because they're not set in a specific place or time. They have that fairy tale quality to it. They transport you literally to another world.
I would even say that the outsiders, right? And Madeline Kahn is an outsider in this particular story. I think Gene Wilder is an outsider until he comes in, much like Basil Rathbone. Basil Rathbone was when he showed up, in Son of Frankenstein to clear his, his father's
I hadn't thought about that, but you're right. You're absolutely right.
All that. But he's dressed in sort of like the late 30s, early 40s sort of style of dress, 30s kind of 40s style of dress, dashing, but somewhat aristocratic from an American standpoint. But when Wilder goes back, he's got that very much 30s, 40s classic sort of look. But the outsider is Madeline Kahn, who shows up, clearly dressed like she's a New York socialite, of the time, again in that sort of 1940 sort of style. So you tell time really by the outsiders more than you do inside the bubble of Transylvania, which is anytime, anywhere in Europe kind of thing.
Yes, that's right. One of my favorite scenes, actually, in this movie, that just sort of made me clap is when they're having breakfast. They're having breakfast because they've decided they're going to start working on the monster. And they're in the breakfast nook in the castle. And it's got these big skylights, and the sun is shining in, and there's, lilies everywhere. And that breakfast nook, I swear to God, looks almost identical to a couple of these scenes in Universal Pictures, certainly in Bride. And
but you don't think they use the same sets? Because, they use the same set for the for a lot of stuff.
It's a good question. I doubt it, because it doesn't look like a particularly permanent set. But
no, they didn't use the same sets, but the production designer, certainly, designed them with them in mind. Those sets, I don't believe actually existed anymore, but
because they use the same they use the same prop.
Right.
But you don't think they use the same sets?
No, I think they were different. They were influenced heavily by.
So you'd have somebody basically pulling out all the old movies and watching them and go, all right, well, this is where they would eat breakfast. It would look like this. But it's so amazing, and it's one thing to evoke that world through, the gnarled trees and the castle and the laboratory, but to evoke it through just sort of the everyday life that characters in the Universal horror universe have. I don't know.
Lots of movies have tried, and many have failed. Where this one succeeds. We did. Years ago, at this point, we did Van Helsing, which was trying to do this same hat trick and doesn't quite, even though it does have really good production design. That's one of the things you can say is good about that movie. Yeah. It doesn't nail it. It doesn't nail it like this does.
That's a really interesting point. I hadn't thought about why this succeeds where Van Helsing fails. You were going to say something, Adam? I don't know.
Now that you've told me that, I'm slightly derailed. I'm like, where do you begin?
Yeah.
but the thing, I think one of the things that surprised me, and Julie, you brought up a really good point, and that is about the sets. I think what surprised me was, this was a Fox picture that was shot on the Fox lot, but it was the exteriors. You would have thought might have been shot at Universal, because all those same backlot kind of exteriors that were used, most of them still exist in one form or another. I think at Universal, at the studio, but they shot it at MGM. They didn't use the Universal stuff. You would have kind of thought that maybe because people shoot stuff all the time and they just pay for it, in different studios, so it's not uncommon.
Absolutely.
But they didn't do that.
And I know that stuff's still there because Nancy Drew runs around it in an episode of Nancy Drew. So,
well, and they talk a lot about also in the documentary about how not just the sets but the black and white, the quality of the black and white. They wanted it to be kind of overdone so that it looked even more old basically than the old movies did. So they actually had the guy who was doing the prints, and you guys probably know the name of the person, but I don't. They had him go back and change it to be even more kind of high contrast or whatever it was that they wanted to have different effects.
Somebody explain this whole thing to me.
Somebody explain it who understands it better than I do, but I just know that they hadn't explained to him that they wanted it to be the way they wanted it to be, so he tried to match it exactly how the black and white was, and they're like, no, we don't want it this way, and so then he went back and changed it. But somebody who understands that better than I do might explain it better.
Actually, you explained it really well. I think the whole point is that it wasn't just doing it exactly in that style. It was actually, pushing it farther, sort of taking it, almost like a parody of those pictures, but paying an homage.
The closest thing to me as far as being as pitch perfect at recreating a look that we've done on this show would be House of the Devil, which is recreating the look of an early 80s horror film. And they do as good of a job as this does of recreating the look of a Universal monster movie.
Yeah.
Is that Rob Zombie?
No, House of the Devil is an independent picture. What I don't remember is, was House of the Devil done on film, or is it digital and just fakes the look of film? Does anybody know?
Nope.
Because that's part of the goodness of House of the Devil. And golly, Adam, you totally need to see this movie. It's sort of a takeoff on Halloween. I mean, or actually, it's a takeoff on cheaper movies than that. I mean, stuff like The Car and things like that, where you had a lower budget. And it has that sort of really sort of thick, almost grainy, not quite grainy, but really thick, filmy quality that you get in a movie made around 1981, if you know what I'm talking about. And I mean, it is so...
you made it sound so sleazy, like we're talking about porn all of a sudden. If you know what I mean.
Porno, early 80s horror films, it's a fine line.
It's all part of the same thing. Yeah. They're gonna have to do like a perfect parody that takes place in the Seychelles and it has like Emmanuel hunting monsters and stuff. So it'll only work if you make it look like 1981. Oh
no, I think Jason's gonna make us do an Emmanuel retrospective now. I can feel
please, for the love of
We've gone too long without an Emmanuel reference.
Right.
I was beginning to think Jason was slacking.
Very sad. By the way, I have to play it for all of you because I discovered recently on YouTube the Emmanuel theme, which is hilarious.
Of course you did. What precisely were you looking for on YouTube when you discovered that, sweetheart?
Emmanuel.
Jason, stop digging yourself into that hole, buddy.
All right. Let's get back to the film stock, please.
Young Frankenstein.
Yeah,
remember.
So what's interesting is, going back to the film and the soupy stock they were using in the 80s, but in this particular case, the fact that they shot it in black and white, what was interesting, and I think you guys all know this, that the studios were not that interested in shooting in black and white because that's just not what wouldn't sell. They didn't think it would really sell. And one of the ideas early on was to make it more like Wizard of Oz, which was black and white, and then to sort of transform it to color when it became sort of like Gene Wilder's time. But they, and part of the influence I think was foreign or maybe even television. I think the idea that black and white stuff wouldn't just sell in the theaters, but theatrically, and also foreign markets wouldn't buy it, and also wouldn't make the transition well to TV. So the studio, Fox, really wanted it to be color, but it was Brooks who put his foot down and just said, no, it needs to be black and white. And it was a big thing, and I mean imagine what would have happened had it been
I can
black
only
and white
imagine
to
how horrible that
color
would be.
or pure color.
I mean, yeah. So first of all, is that true? Well, so did the movie do well? I have no idea how Young Frankenstein did. I mean, I know that everybody regards it as a classic.
It actually did really well, particularly at the time. I don't know what the actual hard numbers are. So it came out in '74. It did certainly as well as I understand it, like Blazing Saddles did. Did that same kind of, had that same kind of release. It did. It's also incredibly sort of quotable. So I think people just kept seeing it again, and it's endured. So I don't know what the actual. I should probably look and see what the actual.
I don't have anything on that. I do have
but considering
nominations.
It cost like what, $2 million to make.
Yeah.
So it's
funny to think that doing such a good job isn't necessarily all that expensive. It was nominated for Academy Award. Didn't win any Oscars, but it was nominated for Best Sound and Best Adapted Screenplay. And then, isn't that interesting? Adapted Screenplay because it's based on a story. The Gene Wilder story. And a Golden Globe for Best Actress for Cloris Leachman. Golden Globe Best Supporting Actress for Madeline Kahn.
Which is funny because Madeline Kahn actually has more lines than Cloris, or whatever. Which one? Which one's the Best Actress? You said.
Cloris Leachman was nominated for Best Actress.
Yeah, so she actually had less lines than Madeline Kahn, but Madeline Kahn got the supporting. Isn't that funny?
Yeah. No, it's very true. But I mean, let's think about that for a second. I mean, Cloris Leachman. So both of those are like queens of comedy, right? But so Cloris Leachman is doing this crazy role. Cloris, we haven't talked about her yet, but next we'll get to Feldman. But Cloris Leachman plays Frau Blucher. Whose name is always greeted by the whinnying of horses in the distance.
Yes.
And her character is just this. She's actually a trope that's lifted more from movies like Rebecca, by Alfred Hitchcock and other stuff, where, she's the one who serves the old master or the old mistress. And
such a different character for her than anything.
Yeah.
By the way, I did look on the IMDb. It says the budget was $2,800,000 and the gross was $86 million. So not too bad.
I think it did okay.
Yep.
So it turned out all of that. William Goldman said that the one thing you learned in Hollywood was that nobody knows anything. So all these people are telling Brooks, you can't make it in black and white. That'll be a big flop. Don't do it. Don't do it. And he says no, and it turns out, at least in this case, that they were completely wrong.
Well, they underestimated him.
Well, yeah, but, think back. It doesn't always work that way because they told Michael Cimino, you can't make a 3-hour Western. Nobody's going to want to watch it. And that turned out to be true. So,
but there are 3-hour Westerns that people have wanted to watch. It's just not that one.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing. It's like, it just depends on how good it is and how much publicity and all that stuff.
That's true. Yeah, that's true. And it's also not fair to compare Young Frankenstein to Heaven's Gate. So, all right.
I mean, how long was Unforgiven? Wasn't Unforgiven really long, I feel like?
No, you're right. Right you are. Everybody talks about the curse of the Western, but there are great Westerns. So that's another thing we need to do. If we can figure out how to shoehorn Westerns into our extremely loose criterion.
Well, there is the weird Western genre.
Oh my gosh, yes. Yes, you're right. We could do Billy the Kid meets
Okay. We'll talk about that offline.
Young Frankenstein. Frankenstein.
Frankenstein.
Right. Okay. You know what? What I want to go on to now, because we need to talk really quickly about Boyle and Feldman, and then I want to go into what could have gone wrong, and then we need to wrap this up because we're definitely going long. All right. So.
And you wondered if we would have enough to talk about.
All right. Let's talk about Feldman, actually. Marty Feldman, this is really the only movie that I knew him from, except for, I guess I may have caught a few scenes of various other things that he was in. But does anybody know the history of... Marty Feldman plays Igor, and he's Igor, and he's extremely funny. He's an extremely funny Cockney hunchback guy.
And he keeps changing the hunchback from one side, the hunch from one side to back to the other.
That's a funny bit.
And he provides a lot of the just sudden, surprising laughs. So sudden and surprising that in at least one I can think of, Gene Wilder in the take they use still is cracking.
Well, and I was saying before we started that I feel sorry for Marty Feldman because this is the scene when he decides himself, I think, is to say whenever it's this, because we haven't even actually talked about the plot, but Teri Garr is the lab assistant for Dr. Frankenstein, and his fiancée is Madeline Kahn. If his fiancée shows up, like she's from in another city, but she shows up, and so Marty Feldman's like, kind of making a joke that he can help out with these two young ladies that Gene Wilder is so fortunate to have. And so Gene Wilder says, help with the bags, and he goes, you take the blonde one, I'll take the one in the toy bin. And it's like, kind of this, anyway, but then they walk in and he's still making that joke, and I don't know. So there's various things that are happening with him, and finally at one point he chooses to bite the fox head off of Madeline Kahn's fox stole, and Madeline Kahn hits him with her little evening purse. But every time he does it, Gene Wilder cracks up. This is in the outtakes. So the poor guy, I'm thinking, is getting whacked on the head over and over with this purse. But it's like the funniest thing because they just cannot not laugh. And even when in the take they actually use, Gene Wilder just kind of has this look on his face like he's about to start cracking up.
Yes. He says stop that, but he's laughing as he says stop. It's wonderful. I mean, and it really does just. It's funny to say this in a comedy, but it lightens the mood so much. It makes you really on the side of these guys that you're watching. Igor, by the way. Igor. and the reason for that gag, I'm glad we haven't talked about the plot that much because I want to save you know, this is a movie that you can really just watch it. But, okay, Igor is another thing that Wilder and Brooks are calling back to, which is, how else to put this, one of the least understood tropes of horror movies. That somehow, somewhere along the way, we developed a movie tradition of a hunchback or other deformed character helping out the mad scientist, and he's called Igor. And I don't know why that happened, because when...
Well, there's a Bela Lugosi character in Son of Frankenstein and Ghost of Frankenstein. It's funny, a lot of people think Peter Lorre originated that character, and it's actually Bela Lugosi, and I would say it's
Peter Lorre
one of
ever
Bela
played
Lugosi's...
Igor?
Not to my knowledge, but...
Well, that's because in the original Frankenstein, the Igor character was named Fritz.
There's an Igor type. It's Fritz. It's Dwight Fry.
Yeah,
who was also Renfield in Dracula.
That's right. Right. But he was
oh my gosh, that's
So
right.
what did Peter Lorre play?
Peter Lorre just played himself in a lot of movies.
Peter Lorre played a lot of weaselly characters that could easily be seen as an extension of this trope, but he never played an Igor, quote-unquote Igor, properly.
Peter Lorre had that delightful accent that is easy for people to do. I mean, it's easy for people to do a Peter Lorre sort of, you know, exaggerated, like, the lights so bright, you know.
But Bela Lugosi is Igor is a very, very specific character, and in my opinion, as good of a creation as Lugosi's Dracula or Karloff's Frankenstein. It's a wonderful character. Not at all like Miss Igor, though.
Yeah. No, but actually, you know, okay, I gotta say this about Igor, about the YGOR Igor character that Bela Lugosi plays, and that is that that's a really good role. I mean, that is a role that nobody remembers because you'd have to watch the movies to remember, because it's not a caricature. It's a fully fleshed out human role that Bela Lugosi created. He is lost under all of this makeup. He has this hunch, this heavy coat, this beard, you know, snaggle.
Well, he has this really, like, you know, he doesn't have the Bela Lugosi voice. He has this, like, he's supposed to have a bone lodged in his throat, so he has this really weird, raspy
It's a real,
voice.
honest-to-God performance from Bela Lugosi that shows you that in another universe, Bela Lugosi could have turned out to be a really fine actor doing a lot of really fine performances. And we just didn't really get that. That wasn't the career that we happened to get. But he was good. Bela Lugosi was a very good actor, and Igor is the place you can see it, the two movies. He was also a terrible Frankenstein's monster, for what that's worth. But
yeah.
You know,
but not as bad as Glenn Strange.
I've forgotten about. Wasn't Glenn Strange like a Have Gun Will Travel style? Like,
he was also Bela Lugosi's stuntman in Frankenstein meets the Wolfman.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And that's how he transitioned into playing Frankenstein, being the go-to guy.
I've always felt that monster makeup, like monster masks based on Frankenstein, at least from my childhood, always seem to be based mainly on Glenn Strange, which is sort of
there's a reason for that, is because the Universal was in litigation with the Karloff family, and they didn't want to have to potentially deal with that. So Glenn Strange, I'm not kidding at all.
That's amazing. Well, I've learned something about Universal art.
I did too, actually.
Wow, Jason, this is probably a first for you, and like.
No, I learn things all the time, but that one just blows my mind.
That's interesting.
All right, I want to talk a little bit about how this movie could have gone wrong, and then wrap it up with our final thoughts, if there's anything at all that we didn't mention. And I'm sure there's plenty of things that we owe time to. But what I was thinking about was, I've seen a lot of horror parodies, even from this period, the late 60s, the early 70s, and they never were very good. I mean, like, the one that I mentioned was, earlier, the Maltese Bippy, which I didn't remember what it was called, but it was a Rowan and Martin, the guys who made Laugh-In. It was a Rowan and Martin parody of horror movies where they're wandering around an old house and there's Julie Newmar and there's a lot of creepy stuff. And those movies never make you laugh. Never, never, never. And likewise, The Old Dark House, which was a comedy with Tom Poston, and that was made by William Castle. I dare you to try to sit through The Old Dark House because it's not just not scary, it is hard to just stay awake. It's hard to figure out why you need to spend another few minutes.
Well, that was also a remake of the Universal horror film.
Isn't that interesting? Oh, okay, good. Right. And yet, so something goes wrong in a lot of horror parodies, and yet everything went right here.
I think contempt for the horror genre a lot of the times. Like, you look at stuff like Repossessed or the Scary Movie series, and they just seem to be coming from the snide standpoint. Like, you're stupid for watching these kind of movies. Like, that's the attitude that they're taking with you. Whereas this embraces, and you can tell that it is made by people who love the movies that they are poking fun at.
Yeah, you're right. I think that's probably it. There's this really lovely, there's this sense that these movies are wonderful. That when he's saying, this is a good boy and this creature needs love, there's somewhere in there is this kernel of a belief that that's something worth talking about. I think contempt might be the right word. Has anybody seen the Dracula one that Mel Brooks did?
Dracula Dead and Loving It, yeah. Not as good as this.
It's not as good as this. It's funny. It's not as bad as the Maltese Bippy. I mean, it's but it's it suffers from Mel Brooks disease, which is sometimes the movie will have just too many gags.
Well, I also think here you're looking at Mel Brooks at the peak of his talent, whereas like Dracula Dead and Loving It was literally the last movie he directed, so it was the end of his directing. Yeah, the end of his directing career. He's produced movies since then, and obviously he's been very active on Broadway. But I mean, Dracula Dead and Loving It has a great Dwight Frye-like performance from what's his face, Peter McCall, I think.
That's right.
I mean, it's certainly not a bad. Yeah, it's certainly not a bad movie per se. It's not near as horrible as this.
Well, we may very well in this retrospective wind up doing Dracula Dead and Loving It. I mean, it certainly captures a lot of. Yeah, it's pretty good.
But Jason, you were saying that this has too many gags, and I think it's interesting that actually the movie was like at least twice as long they filmed at least twice as much material than they ended up using, and but it wasn't very funny to people because they did have too many gags, so they ended up in this film just cutting the heck out of it and made it a much, much better film. But I think that probably its initial version that was screened, it was exactly that, what you said about the too many gags, and
interesting.
2/3 of them.
And I still think that it's probably missing the heart that's in this picture.
Yeah.
You mean Dracula Dead and Loving It?
Yeah.
I mean,
I think that's.
Yeah. I mean, the instincts of Mel Brooks. He sometimes has fantastic instincts, and he sometimes has instincts that aren't necessarily what I would like. Like, I feel like this movie is extraordinarily classy. It
does have a lot to do with Gene Wilder. I mean, the fact is some of the best stuff in here is Gene Wilder's stuff and things that Mel Brooks didn't even want. Mel Brooks didn't want that Petting on the Ritz scene in there. And he only left it in because the audience loved it so much.
Well, also in fairness to Brooks, Dracula Dead and Loving It comes out, and also, again, at a point in his career where he can't really fight for things like, I want to make this movie in black and white. Like, he didn't have the clout at that point. He was the guy that made Spaceballs at that point.
That one's probably a bad example, too, because Dracula Dead and Loving It is a parody of color films. I mean, it's more patterned after. But I'm saying I've read interviews with Mel Brooks where he says, the way I think of my movies is you got to have a gag every few seconds. If you don't like this one, just sit tight. There's going to be another gag in a few seconds.
History of the World is a really great example of that. And History of the World is a great Mel Brooks style picture. It's gag. It is very, very funny. It is not the same picture or the same kind of picture in any way, really, that Young Frankenstein is. There's a lot more connective tissue holding those bits together. There's setups and payoffs and everything else. It's not gag. Yeah. But it's high anxiety. It's also a really good Mel Brooks picture.
I love that you always call them pictures, even when they're like really crappy movies. It makes me feel like I'm in this, like film appreciation class.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and when you get down to it, I mean, he is masterful, right? These are pictures. Now, if we want to pull out like a really crappy movie, I love movies too. I mean, sometimes you can just go see a movie and go, wow, that's going to be like a weird, guilty pleasure. Example, there are very few people who really like Golden Child. Remember the Murphy picture, The Golden Child?
Murphy?
Yeah, the Golden. Eddie Murphy. It was a good movie. It was a movie. It's a weird, guilty pleasure movie. It was good. It was sort of before Holy Man and Distinguished Gentleman and all that stuff. It was actually very funny. He was playing his sort of character. He was good. It was a good movie. Not a picture. It was not a film. Right? but it was a good movie.
Mel Brooks, for his faults and his strengths, I would say, is an artist of his kind of movie. I mean, can anybody really argue against
You're right.
that?
He is a genuine artist. I mean, you can point to him and go, I know what that guy's looks like. I know what to expect.
Oh, now we're using of. Now we're really in a film appreciation class.
Well, but it's the idea of our tour theory, and I think Mel Brooks is an auteur.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Once they crack out the French, we've really elevated this podcast beyond its usual standards.
All right. So
that's what you get when you bring in the Brooks, all right?
So we definitely need to get people's final thoughts because we've talked about the Old Dark House and the Maltese Bippy and somehow Emmanuel. So we need to get to our final thoughts on Young Frankenstein. I wish there were a post. Okay. Same direction we just did before. Adam, final thoughts, Young Frankenstein, and then we'll come around again for endorsements. Go for it.
I think that if you haven't seen this picture for whatever reason, either you didn't see it when it was released or you sort of missed it on the radar, it's one that you have to see. If this really was a film appreciation class, I would say that this is a seminal picture of a particular kind of genre, but then also, as Drew, I think, said earlier, this is a great Frankenstein picture anyway, one of the best. It just adds so much even just to the tapestry that is Frankenstein, even though it's a comedy. So it's a great melding of the two genres, but also a really great story. So if you haven't seen it, you should. If you haven't seen it lately, you should see it again because it's sort of like an old friend. And it makes you, in my case, it makes me remember in some way kind of like why I got into sort of what I do, and that is that you really can, shape a story and a film to elicit not just an emotional reaction, whether it's pathos or but laughs, and have those things coexist in a way that when you leave it, you go, wow, you know what, that was really good. So it's surprisingly moving as well as very, very funny, gut-bustingly funny. And I still think it's an amazing picture. I really do.
Thank you very much. Okay, Drew, final thoughts?
I honestly don't have anything that I would say that Adam didn't just say. He read my mind.
Julia?
Well, I mean, like I said before, to me, what makes it so wonderful, in addition to all the things that you guys have mentioned about the homage to horror, it's like I said, it's just this group of actors is so brilliant, and it's all kind of chance because it just so happened that they were all represented by the same agent. So it's like the agent wanted to work with the movie studio, so he put Gene Wilder and Peter Boyle and Marty Feldman together. And then you've got Mel Brooks, who just, every little thing he does, just down to the fact that, they're shooting the scene with the throwing the darts, and Gene Wilder throws a dart and it goes out the window, and just Mel Brooks just randomly off the side screeches like a cat, wow! And that's just ad-libbed, and there's so much stuff that's just thrown in by all these good folks. Gene Wilder just ad-libs all this crazy stuff, and it's just so much. They had so much fun that Mel Brooks actually came up with scenes at the end just to keep shooting because he was having such a good time, and Gene Wilder has said it's his favorite film that he's made. So you can see that, like when you're watching it, you can just see that they're having such a good time, and it's a lot of fun. So yes, I totally agree that if you haven't seen it, or if you haven't seen it lately, see it.
I will only add that if you're putting together a Blu-ray or a DVD collection of Universal horror pictures, this one deserves to be there, even though it's not technically it's not really a Universal horror. It fits right there next to the Frankenstein pictures, and it certainly deserves that place.
Well, it's certainly part of that universe, even if it's like a pocket universe. They use the geek
and it
speak.
knows it is. I mean, he even says Monster's been with us 5 times before, and he's referencing other Frankenstein pictures that fit this universe. There's just so much great stuff going on here. It also makes me want to go and watch Son of Frankenstein and Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman again. Because there's just so much delight in those Universal pictures. It took me years to understand how wonderful I don't know how else to put it, how wonderful the violent innocence of those movies is. So that's all I have to say about Young Frankenstein. Why don't we go around to endorsements? I can't wait to hear what people have. Adam, is there anything you want to lay on us for endorsements?
Actually, in the world of video games, The Last of Us was released fairly recently, and is a really great example of very well scripted dialogue, really good story, great narrative design. It's very natural and compelling, and it's like every minute sort of detail is in there. It feels like a very consistent and detailed and very solid world, and it's a lot of fun. The Last of Us.
The Last of Us. All right.
Check it out.
No, absolutely. And we need to be good about posting links on our Facebook page of the stuff that we endorse, so people can go, what was that thing that Adam mentioned or that Jason mentioned? Absolutely. Drew, did you have any endorsements for us?
I have 2 things, and one I have been posting the link for this first thing. The Danger Cakes Indiegogo thing, they're trying to raise money to go on tour. They're going on tour at the end of this month. They are now over $1,000, so if any of you actually donated, thank you. But they still need more money. So even if you can just donate $1, please. These girls are the hardest working people I know. I mean, they're practicing in my living room right now. I'm doing this podcast from the parking lot. They are so tireless in trying to make this band a success, and they are absolutely worth just a minute of your time, so you can go and check out their video and maybe consider donating $1 or $2. My other endorsement fits very well with the subject of this week's podcast, though, because when I rented this movie to watch it in preparation for that, it was 2-for-1 Tuesdays at Vulcan Video, so I got Haunted Honeymoon, which for those of you who have not seen it, it's an out-of-print movie, so you'll have to hunt it down. But it's another Gene Wilder horror parody with Dom DeLuise and Gilda Radner, and it's also extremely funny and extremely atmospheric, and I highly recommend it for all you Young Frankenstein fans.
Gilda Radner was his wife, wasn't she?
She was.
Yeah. I had forgotten about Haunted Honeymoon, but what a great idea. That one sometimes turns up on TV, but wow. You know what, by the way, is not as strong. Same time period, Transylvania 65000.
Right.
Do not watch that one alone. Holy God. It's yet another one like the Maltese Bippy. That's very hard to sort of work your way through. Okay.
I actually own a copy of that. So
you own Transylvania 65000?
Lay it on us, Adam. Do you have a crush on Gina Davis? Is that what this is about?
It's either that or Ed Begley Jr. I don't know which. I think I'm going to have to go with Gina Davis.
Listen, next time I'm in LA, let's watch Transylvania 65000. And,
you're on.
Some fine malt beverages and watch Transylvania 65000, and that'll be a good time.
It does have Michael Richards in it in a sort of a bizarre role.
I know. I could barely get through the Michael Richards scene.
That's totally worth it. I mean, that alone is worth it.
It's weird. Some of those gags, and please forgive me if you disagree with me completely and you think this is a work of genius, but some of that stuff, the camera just stays on the characters as they work their way through these gags, and you're like, wow, is nobody going to call cut? Is this scene never going to be done?
No, it just goes. It just goes.
All right, Julia, do you have anything to endorse for us?
I will endorse the Alamo Drafthouse because, as fortune may have it, about 5 minutes after Jason moved up to Denver, they added an Alamo Drafthouse to the neighboring town here. So we kind of got lucky with that because we've been missing it terribly, not living in Austin. And my girls and I just went on yesterday to the Alamo Drafthouse free movie night, where here in Denver the area they show a movie like drive-in style, basically out in the parking lot on a giant screen, free every week during the summer for I don't know how many weeks. And it was Iron Giant last night. And it's just the coolest thing that they do that. I mean, it's just this great service for the community. Everybody just comes out and watches movies, and then they have, like vendors that sell funnel cake and what have you. And this week they had, since it was Iron Giant, they had the schools, a bunch of area schools bringing out their robotics programs. And it was just such a cool thing. And so it's stuff like that the Alamo does. If you have an Alamo in your area, go and check them out because they have some great stuff.
Wow, that's wonderful. There's not much I could say that would be cooler than that, but I do have two things, one related to the Alamo. So this week at the Alamo, I caught a preview screening of The Conjuring, which is the new haunted house movie that opens on July 19th. And while everybody will be watching, and I'm sure that it deserves it, Pacific Rim, which apparently is just fantastic. Nevertheless, also opening in July is The Conjuring. And this is a scary movie. Do not watch The Conjuring if you do not want the crap scared out of you. It is one of those movies where I literally jumped in my seat numerous times. I left the theater and the hair on my arm was like tingling for like half an hour. It was a scary movie, very well done. And takes place in 1972. It harkens back to stuff like The Changeling, and there's bits of Poltergeist, and there's all these wonderful pieces. As somebody said, though, it has a lot of pieces that you've seen in other horror movies before, but, Fred Astaire did not invent tap dancing. This is a great movie. So I really like The Conjuring. I also, to Netflix very recently, Netflix has added Transylvania 65000, but that wasn't what exactly, although it's there if you want to see Michael Richards and his weird puppet. But they also have added a whole bunch of really groovy 1940s Disney cartoons. And so the girls and I have been watching them, and the other night we watched Jack and the Beanstalk, which was a Disney cartoon starring Mickey Mouse. The last Mickey Mouse cartoon that Walt Disney actually did the voice of Mickey Mouse in, 1947. Originally, it was hosted by Charlie McCarthy and Edgar Bergen, but the version that is seen here is the one that we would have caught in the 70s on the ABC night show. What was that? Wonderful World of Disney. So it's hosted by Scrooge McDuck.
No, not Scrooge McDuck. Professor, whatever the heck his name is.
Okay, Professor German Duck guy. And
Professor Gearloose.
Something like that.
Seriously?
No, it's
seriously.
Not.
Anyway, all of these wonderful 1940s Disney cartoons have been added to Netflix, and it is so wonderful to see these things because they're delightful. They're a piece of Americana, and so that's what I recommend. The Conjuring, which will scare the crap out of you, and also the new classic Disney cartoons that have been added to Netflix.
I hear good things about Pacific Rim too, so that should be exciting.
Oh yeah, no, a movie that needs no endorsement. Boy, that one is that will do extraordinarily well.
Well, apparently it does need endorsement because they're predicting kind of a rocky opening weekend for it. Yeah.
I don't know. Everybody at the Alamo was like freaking out whenever they did the preview. They were all going.
Hey,
nuts.
I hope it does well. I have a vested interest in seeing original monster movies do well. So I hope I'm wrong. I'm an avid reader of Box Office Mojo, and they are not predicting a good weekend for it. But they are known to be wrong.
Yeah, it has happened. And Lone Ranger. I was very sad that Lone Ranger didn't do well.
Did you see Lone Ranger?
No, I haven't seen it. But I mean, I was figured they tried this back in '81 or '82, whatever that was, with the Legend of the Lone Ranger, which had Christopher Lloyd, and then that was toxic. So all these years go by, and they blow it again. So I don't know if they screwed it up.
They kind of breaks my heart too, because I have a lot of nostalgia for the show, because they used to run it back to back with Wild West in my hometown. But everything about that movie just looks slightly like they did not market that well. I have to say. Yeah.
It may well be that's the problem.
As much as I love Johnny Depp, it really doesn't seem like the best casting choice.
Johnny Depp, you got to market a Lone Ranger. The marketing around a Lone Ranger movie should not be. And I say this to somebody who is, my dad is half Cherokee. I'm a quarter Cherokee. I get it that they want to beef up the Native American character because they don't want to make the mistakes of past Westerns. I understand that. But the marketing behind a Lone Ranger movie should be about the Lone Ranger character. That's just
Adam, you said you saw it?
Yeah, he saw it.
I saw it.
So what are your thoughts on the I know we didn't bring you here to talk about the Lone Ranger, but I'm curious.
Well, I can sort of boil it all down. Drew's right. That's in the marketing you're sort of seeing it. But the other thing is, Johnny Depp is eminently watchable in pretty much whatever he's doing, as far as I can tell. And they have him doing a lot of different things in this movie. This is a movie, not a picture. Just for the record, we were talking about this earlier. This is a movie. And I wasn't totally sure about this kind of going in, and I wasn't sure about Superman, and I wasn't sure about this, and I think I was right about Superman. I haven't seen it, but someone said, "Look, this will be. You'll find it entertaining, but really the last 10 minutes will be the most sort of action-packed 10 minutes that you're going to see in a picture this summer." Now, I don't know how this compares to White House Down, which I think is supposed to be. That's a movie as well, by the way. In the most awesome way, I guess. But I think my personal problem with this was you really couldn't market the Lone Ranger around the Lone Ranger character, because the way they have Armie Hammer playing him is he's sort of like, I don't know, he's kind of like the guy in the Muppet reboot, or like Brendan Fraser. He's playing a very goofy character. He's not, he's out for revenge and whatever, sort of, for justice, later. They mostly give all that to Tonto. And really, he's sort of being played as an Eastern-educated, pugilistic, law school graduate who goes back to his town in the West and doesn't fit in, fish out of water in the West. I think it's played for laughs a lot, and a lot of that misfire. I mean, what they're really trying to do, I understand it. They're really trying to recapture the pirate chemistry. Yeah. A lot of the same people are involved, but the thing is, it doesn't really all play. The people I happen to see a picture with, they liked it. I think some liked it a lot. Some liked it well enough. I think I was probably the one who was sort of disappointed in a bunch of things. It was, it was not a disaster. For $200 million, having seen the year before the last Disney $200 million picture, which was John Carter, and 30 seconds into it, it felt like we were in trouble, and it didn't rise out of that ever. This is pulled together in a way that you go, okay, it's not a disaster at all. It's just, I think it's depending on what your expectations are, or if you have any kind of feelings about the Lone Ranger and how that's treated, it disconnects enough from it. Maybe in the same way that I keep hearing that Superman's reboot is sort of unhooked from like the way classic Superman sort of behaves. The Superman movie is. I can say this because I liked the Superman movie, and I can safely say I am a fan of Superman from the comics. But this is not referencing
the Christopher Reeve Superman. This is very much based on the Superman comic books from like the last 20 years, from like the 80s on up, and it has that feel to it. And I can understand if you were kind of expecting something more like the Christopher Reeve Supermans, which I like those movies too. I'm okay with different interpretations of characters throughout time, but I can understand what you would be disappointed if that happened. However, I don't think people want to go to see a movie called The Lone Ranger and have the Lone Ranger be a doofus. I mean, that we saw that exact same thing with the Green Hornet. With a Green Hornet movie. I was like one of 6 people who saw that movie in the theater, and it was only because my friend bought me a ticket to it. I had no interest in paying full price to see that.
Yeah. Well, let me give you, and totally we got to close this out, but it occurs to me, imagine if the Batman reboots, which is Batman Begins, had come up with a concept where instead of just Batman making mistakes, which he does, he falls, he breaks, he bums his leg, kind of stuff like that, but rather, if Batman had been a total doofus and Alfred was really the one teaching him to do all this stuff and making it look like it was really Batman, you would feel gypped. You'd feel like, this is a movie that doesn't like Batman. this movie doesn't like Batman. It doesn't want there to be Batman. And maybe but I haven't seen it, so maybe there's a little bit of that. I also remember this is a problem people had with Dark Shadows, whereas I actually defended the reboot of Dark Shadows.
And I did too.
Yeah, so who knows? I will probably see it. It can't be any worse than the extremely somber. Oh, go ahead. Yeah, no, I was thinking about Lone Ranger. Yeah.
It's not bad. It's not bad. It's just it's maybe not what I expected. It just I think it just
So is that the kind of money where they could try again with a sequel? Make Armie Hammer smarter.
I don't know. They could, because they've introduced his character and he's kind of gotten over his awkward phase. You know what I mean? Like, it's possible they could sort of do that, but I feel like they've shot out the. You're
saying this is an adolescent Lone Ranger, is what you're telling me?
Well, the thing is, you have pilot syndrome. Where well, there's a syndrome where the first movie is basically a pilot, so you have to get all the characters in their place. So you only get towards. I haven't seen Lone Ranger, but with a lot of movies where it's clearly the first, all the characters aren't in their familiar spots until near the end of the movie. And it's like the Addams Family movie, which is actually quite good, but the Addams Family movie was really like an episode called How Uncle Fester Joined the Addams Family, and you don't have a traditional group until the end.
That is a movie we have to get around to doing.
That is true.
I agree. That's totally true. All right, we've definitely. I can't believe we've run over time. That never happens. And so I'm thrilled, though. This was such a wonderful thing to discuss. Okay, everybody, thank you so much. I value all of your opinions. Everybody listening in the chat room, thank you so much for being there. Darren, thank you. Everybody, if you're on Facebook, like us on Facebook, leave comments, argue with us, call us names. We will respond because we eat that stuff up. Review us on iTunes, tell your friends, tweet, whatever. And we will be deeply appreciative. And we will see you very, very soon with our next horror comedy. And I do not know what it is. I will talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye.
Guys. Bye.